And we are going to go through our second week of social studies. And last week, we talked about rights and responsibilities and representative democracy. And we talked a lot about leadership and the characteristics of leadership. And this week, I want us to think about as leaders and as potential future leaders for Mississippi and for the American South, why is it important for us to be conscious of the assets and deficits of our community as leaders? And one reason that's important is that in order to be a good leader, we must understand what good things are happening in our community and what things people want to have changed in order to make it better. So, we're going to talk about some of the physical characteristics of the American South as far as geography and weather. And we're also going to talk just about some of the different characteristics of our area and things that we can be proud of and things that we know we need to work on in order to make the South and Mississippi a better place. So as you see here, I've written great leaders know the assets and deficits of their community. So that's what I want us to think about as we go through our PowerPoint today. All right, so we can see how the American South has a different geographical position from other parts of our country. Specifically, we're going to focus on these states in dark red, as those are the ones most often included in definitions of the South, while those in our medium red or stripes are not always necessarily considered part of the Deep South. So those are 8 states right there. We have Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. We're going to skip this. Talking about water, bodies of water in the South, there are 2 oceans that border the South. That's the Gulf of Mexico, which touches Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida there as well. And then the Atlantic Ocean touches Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean are the 2 oceans that border the South. One river runs through 5 different southern states. That river is, of course, the Mississippi River, and it hits Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. One of our vocabulary words this week is peninsula, which is land surrounded by water. Of course, we can see Florida is a peninsula, a southern state that is a peninsula. And down here in the bottom right, you see a picture, and that picture articulates the delta of the Mississippi River. Like I said, a delta is an area of fertile land and soil, and that's often due to proximity to water or to something like a river. So it is a triangle-shaped area at the mouth of the river in a place of rich soil. So we can see right here that the delta of the Mississippi River is located in Missouri, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, but mainly we're going to discuss Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana as the three of our southern states that share the delta. And 3 southern cities built near water. So this is something I want us to think about, why southern cities were built in such close proximity to water as they were constructed hundreds of years ago. And a lot of that is due to transportation and the ability for humans to transport goods and services in the late 1800s, early 1700s, and early 1900s as these cities were coming about. And of course, back then we didn't necessarily have cars or airplanes, so a lot of these cities were built near water in order to access goods and services. So some examples are New Orleans down here in Louisiana, Houston, which is a little further inland from Texas. Then we have Savannah down here in Georgia, and Charleston in South Carolina, and then of course Miami in Florida. Okay, talking about geophysical characteristics of the South, the highlands are the highest landforms in the South, and I have pictures here of the Ozarks in Arkansas, and then the Appalachian Mountains. So these are both places of high altitude, which means, as we learned last week, the higher the altitude, the lower the temperature. They're both examples of an interior, which is land that does not border water. So it's a place away from a border or a coast interior. All right, our climate and wildlife in the American South is typically, we all know, warm and humid. I have a map here showing elevation in Mississippi. You can see some of our higher elevation is up here in the northwest corner of the state and kind of sprinkled throughout the middle, and then our lowest elevation is here on the Gulf Coast, and we talked about the Gulf Coast. It borders the Gulf of Mexico. So three factors that control climate. Latitude, we're looking here at a map which shows the equator, and the closer we are to the equator, the warmer the climate of that area is going to be. So latitude on the globe is important as a factor that determines climate. Also our elevation, like we talked about here, higher elevation, higher altitude, lower temperature. Lower elevation, we're getting closer to water. That affects our temperature and climate, and our proximity to water. So water brings us wind. It also brings us typically a lot of sun, and so that can impact our climate as well. Some of our wildlife in the American South, and Mississippi in particular: deer, honeybee, oyster shell, bottlenose dolphin. You can see lots of different animals native to Mississippi. I'm going to take us to a website where you can see some of our native plants. So this is a Ole Miss website.edu/departments/landscape native plants, and you can just go through and look at all the different beautiful plants native to Mississippi. Something that makes us really neat is our abundance of wildlife in our state. All right, so summers in the South are typically very hot and humid, as we all have experienced. The South frequently has severe weather due to its warm, moist air at low levels, cool, dry air aloft, and horizontal winds that increase with height from the ground up and change direction. So they blow from the equator at low levels. So we see a peninsula, Florida here. We know the equator is down here. We've got warm air blowing up from the equator, cool air coming from the north, and that when we have cool and warm air hit, they often create severe weather. So here we can see a picture of an enormous hurricane. You can see the size of this, looks about twice the width of Florida. And right here we see a picture of a tornado. So tornadoes and hurricanes are two examples of severe weather that often affect the South. All right, so again, the weather, talking about tornadoes. Based on this map, we look over here at the scale to help us read the map, and you can see it's based on color. The deeper the red, the more tornadoes per state. So looking at this, we can see that Texas averages the highest number of annual tornadoes. And you see Mississippi is fairly high, Alabama is high, not so high over here in the west or in the northeast. It mainly happens here in this sort of central and southern area. Some of our resources in Mississippi: we have vast land plots, rich soil, waterways, a warm climate, forests. We have some phenomenal educational institutions, and we have a rich arts and culture scene and community in Mississippi. And some of the uses of those here, we can use some of our cotton to make fabric, to make clothes. We also grow lots of food, soybeans for oil, energy. Waterways, we have fish, transportation, and can also use that for energy. Our climate attracts tourists and allows us to have a longer growing season than a lot of other regions. Forests we can use for lumber and paper and other wood needs. We have some great educational institutions where we breed people that are scientists, historians, as well as artists, research, filmers, writers, etc. Producers and consumers. So some of our producers in our economy: farmers, writers and artists, the tourism industry, food and restaurants, and the consumers that go along with those. grocery stores, restaurants, art collectors, tourists, patrons for food and restaurants. So we talked a little bit in class about opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is when you have two opportunities, and basically whichever one you don't choose is technically your opportunity cost. So one example we went over in class is a young man has a chance to go see a movie or study for his test. So if he chooses to study for his test, his opportunity cost is that he's missed the movie. On the flip side, if he chooses to go see the movie, his opportunity cost is that he has lost a chance to study. So we're going to go through that a little bit, another economic term that we're going to focus on. We talked a little bit about stereotypes and some of the stereotypes that other people hold of people in the South and in Mississippi, that we're ignorant, we are behind the times, we're unhealthy, we don't wear shoes. We all know that none of those are true, but I think that this is an important subject to broach as we get ready to discuss civil rights and Black history, and think about the fact that just because one person shows us a behavior or characteristic we don't like, it's important for us to not classify everybody based on that one person, that one interaction we have with one person. I gave an example of if I met a fourth grader in Jackson one day, and they were not very good at science. And then I went home and told my family, all fourth graders in Jackson are really not very good at science. That wouldn't be a fair statement to make, because I don't know all fourth graders in Jackson. I just met one, and that one showed me they were not very good at science. And now I'm making a generalized stereotype of everybody in fourth grade, and we know that those are wrong and incorrect. So I want us to think about how we're stereotyping others if we're unfairly grouping people together based on one or a few interactions. Okay, so our check for understanding that we went through in our class: name 3 of the American South's natural resources. True or false, South Carolina is a peninsula. What are 2 southern states the Mississippi River does not run through? And some of you gave this answer, but you didn't give me southern states. So I want you to think about 2 southern states that the Mississippi River does not run through. And an opportunity cost question here: someone gives up going to see a movie to study for a test in order to get a good grade. What's the opportunity cost there? We just went through that one. And a 5th question: how do you think Mississippi can revive its economy so that it can depend on new resources or types of producers? So Mississippi, we have had a long-term dependency on agriculture, and that stems from a lot of history. We do have rich and fertile soil, but we have long been dependent on that as what's going to keep our state thriving and alive, and often that industry is exclusive and does not provide new opportunities for lots of people. So I want us to think about what are other ways or other businesses or industries that you think Mississippi should pursue in order to revive its economy, an economy that includes everybody. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Write down any questions that you have, and we can go through them more in class. Thanks. Bye.